Arrival in Orkney by Carolyn Reid. It's been a long day's travelling. I think I make some nice warming tomato soup. There's too much acid in this soup on an empty stomach, he says. I think, well, at least it's getting nice and warm in here. It's insufferably hot in here, he says, opening the window. I'll make a cup of tea, I say. I can't fail with a cup of tea, can I? There's too much chlorine in the water in this tea, he says.
You read that so beautifully. It's really got two characters in it, that poem. The one it's paired with is after Carolyn Reid, is after my nan, because I wrote it after reading that poem. And sometimes when you read a poem by someone you love, you're furious and you just want to get revenge for them. So this is called Patience. Go ahead, try to watch me lose my patience. You'll wait a whole damn year, then it'll only take a second.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Poetry to Your Ears, and today we're joined by Reanna Valentine. A new name.
Yeah, indeed.
We had them on the show under the name
One Inky Queer.
Yeah, so this is the first time we've had it. Oh no, Heather.
Yeah.
Sprigs of Heather came on, so this is the
Another
second time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
So same poet, different poet.
Isn't that the question?
Yeah.
Having different poet every day. Basically the same poet, roughly-ish, kind of. Yeah.
But evolving all the while.
Kind of going in a process of reowning myself was what the name change was about. Partly just about being more publishable, but also about kind of reowning myself and my name and my family history and like not hiding behind a somewhat more anonymous moniker.
Yeah, and that family thing is a big factor of this new book, this new publication that come out, because
Fragmented Light.
You're co-authoring it with Carolyn Reid.
Your grandma. Nan.
Yeah, my nan. Yeah, indeed. Both of us, our pen names are respectively her parents. Reid was her mother's maiden name and Valentine was her maiden name, her father's name. So my family are well represented on this book cover.
That's not her legal name then?
No. When I was archiving her work, there were a number of different pen names, mostly due to changes in marriage. Only one of them, but still changes the name back in them days. And then when I asked her a few months ago, what would your name be, your pen name, she settled on this. And I think it's absolutely the right decision. It's nice that her mum's name is in there. Her parents were a bit of a power couple of the day, like very, very lovely, very literary, very impressive people. And it's nice that they're on there.
So how much did your grandmother influence your poetry? Your becoming a poet?
Wouldn't be a poet without her, for sure. Absolutely, for definite. Like
during your childhood?
No, because she was pretty secretive about poetry. Like she'd send poems to people occasionally as gifts or kind of little kind of odes to them. But she was one of those, like, I think there are a lot of poets, maybe even the majority of poets, who are quite secretive about it and keep it close to the chest, you know. And the only time I started seeing like relatively more of her poetry was in lockdown. We agreed to do a bit of a creative exchange, and I was like, I'll send you, you know, a bit of origami or a print or a picture or something. At the time, I wasn't a poet. And you send me something back, and she said, I don't know what to send you. All I've got is poems. And I said, poems are great. Send poems. So she sent me 2 or 3 poems in that time, and we were kind of going back and forth. And she sent me a wonderful poem about a blackbird, and I sent her back an origami blackbird. And the origami blackbird is still on her mantelpiece, but I've lost the bloody poem. Poems on pieces of paper are hard to keep hold of. Very annoyed about that when I was publishing this. But yeah, we had that exchange, and then between that and her sending me Mary Oliver's Wild Geese, which I had up on the wall where I tutor children, that area, I had it up for months. And just that kind of that dawning idea of, like poetry is something my nan can do, and it's something Mary Oliver does in a very accessible way. And this never even occurred to me. You know, I hadn't read much poetry since school. It's not something that moves in the mainstream in a big, shouty scene way a lot of the time. So, like, it never occurred to me it was a thing I could do. And then there was a whole other instigating incident, which I've said on last time's podcast, so I won't go over it again. but certainly my nan laid the foundations and the groundwork.
It involved Brighton Beach.
It involved Brighton Beach and a number of other
Check out episode
elements.
10 or whatever it was. So Mary Oliver is a big influence in this collection.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
you can
after
really see
Mary
that
Oliver.
in the style. And to me, it was really interesting when, you know, you always said, because I had you for the documentary as well, that I made with a really long interview. And you said a big influence in your poetry was your nan. And so I never read her poetry before. And so to me, when I read that book, it was a really nice surprise to see, you know, her style and your style and the way you put them together. Because I found your style very, you know, unique. So I was wondering how, you know, a kind of elderly woman could inspire that style. Because you talk very in the style of, like, I guess being a millennial. I don't know, like just being a queer person in Brighton, a queer disabled person. So I wondered how you could get that from someone else, you know. And definitely the poems that you put in this collection are a little bit in your nan style. I don't know, they match more the pace. I think you have other poems that are a bit more spoken word that you didn't put in there.
And there's one poem in there that I edited because there was a line in it about quite graphically about bondage, and even I have my limits, and I was like publishing a collection with my nan. I'm going to make the bondage slightly more subtle. Use the word dominant instead of the graphic description.
Wrapped it metaphor.
When I was putting the collection together, it was first and foremost very much for me about getting my nan's work out there and getting the nature of our relationship, and this kind of, there is a huge amount of crossover between our poetry. And I sometimes wonder actually if a lot of the stuff I perform on stage is the more like gobby poet stuff. But the quiet and thoughtful and the natural world and the Mary Oliver inspired and stuff, I maybe submit to written magazines, or I just keep to myself. And so it's maybe a different side of me as a poet. But also for me, it was like I went through my nan's work and archived my nan's work. And then there were a lot of them where they just shouted out to me a poem of mine. Like I was like, oh, that goes with that. That goes with that. And I paired them up. And then there were some of them as well where I was like then going through my previous poems going, okay, what can I match up with this one?
Yeah, you say for the audience, you say at the start of the collection that it's a conversation between you and your nan.
Yes.
And so you said
they work like pairs.
Yeah.
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 And you can see that actually through the collection, how, you know, there's similar themes and they complement each other.
Thanks. Yeah. But she said to me when I read her parts of the book, she said to me, and it's really hard to get her to say anything complimentary about her own work. She said to me, Reanna, it really works. And that's because of the strength of the relationship behind it. And that I hold very dear. That made me very happy.
Yeah. And her poems are in different typefaces, kind of like a deranged typewriter font.
Oh my god, I hope the maker of my Underwood does not hear this. That's the font.
Yeah, it's a typeface font, but a little less conservative kind of typeface font.
Yeah, it's not courier. It's not super uniform and identikit.
Yeah.
I went looking on the internet for a typewriter font that most looked like the portable typewriter font that my nan actually typed most of the poems in.
Yeah.
So the
intentional.
original hard copies, and I was looking at these fonts next to it and trying to find the right one.
Yeah.
And this one is a font that somebody made from their individual Underwood typewriter. So it's one typewriter, how that typewriter types.
Yeah.
So that is why it's kind of a bit skew whiff and weird. It's quite intentional.
Yeah. But do you think that changes the way that people read the poems as well, though? Like,
I think
changed
certainly
the-
typewriter has an archaic feel to it.
And your one's in Garamond for the typeface nerds out there.
Yeah.
I didn't think we'd
And why
have a
did you-
conversation
yeah, this
about
is gonna-
fonts, but
Oh no, but you do think about it, don't you? And especially with this book where it alternated fonts in the thing, it's partly meant to be a kind of older voice and a more modern voice.
Yeah.
Because
So
I was
you can
aware of the
see
time
it.
difference in the poems. A lot of hers were written 40 years ago.
Yeah, but I mean, conventionally though, you might have the more, beautiful cursive font. Not cursive, the more kind of beautiful font
Neater.
to be with the older
Yeah.
poet, and the more kind of reckless font to be with the younger poet.
That's interesting.
So it wasn't an intentional
to
kind
me,
of
the typewriter
juxtaposition.
is definitely more ancient. It gives that. I mean, I can't
Yeah.
find the right term, but it gives that more classic. And also because you said she was secretive, so it does have that.
Yeah, it's got secretive
That
quality
keeping
to
it
yeah.
inside,
Yeah.
whereas maybe it's neater. It's like when you publish it into magazines, which you have done, etc. Like kind of have that more public persona of a poet.
Yeah. There's definitely that thing of like, these were mostly in this pink plastic, like really inglorious, not like beautifully displayed or anything. They were in this pink plastic envelope folder, one of those button folders that's like £1 from W.H. Smith's, and it was like overflowing, and they're all on incredibly thin paper because it's that old typewriter paper. And then some of them are just handwritten, and her handwriting's so illegible. Like, I'm one of the few people who can read it because we exchanged a lot of letters. But even I, when I found some, had to check a couple of words. Like, and
So have you kept it all? Then,
it was, my little brother has actually scrapbooked the originals into a big book, which is beautiful, because now we've got like scrapbooked
that's
originals,
really
and then
nice,
this is a more kind of produced version, and this is less than half of her work is in here. So she's got a big back catalogue. But yeah, she didn't show me any of that stuff, like that big back. I had no idea of this back catalogue, that she was a poet,
Wow.
like really.
The whole horde.
Until like a year and a half ago, I had an appalling breakup, like a really awful, like thought it was forever, suddenly it falls apart, and then you go and fall apart at your nan's house, kind of like can't hold it together.
Yeah.
Breakup. And she was like, right, Reanna, I have this heft
Wow.
of heartbreak poetry. Come on then, let's read this. And it really helped me, because I was writing all this heartbreak poetry and I'd shown her some of it, and then she got hers out. But also I just had no idea. Like, she was hiding this folder, and that, like, this enormous breadth of work. And then from then I was like, we should do something together. We should do a paired project. But she was so nervous about sharing it, and so resistant. And at the time she was, well, not so resistant sometimes. And at the time she was ill, and I didn't want to push it. And then when it came to the final month of her life, because we lost her just over a month ago, I said, look, Nan, I could do this project. We could do it now, or I could do it after, or we could not do it at all. But if you want to see it, it's kind of now or never. And she was like, yeah, let's do it. And then she couldn't really do much of it. And I was really aware of the time constraints.
Yeah.
And I was also like full-time caring for her a lot of the time as well while I was doing it. But end to end, from archiving her work to sending it to print, was 3 weeks, which was insane to like publish a full collection when you've never self-published before, you've never done book design, you've never done the printing.
Yeah.
And I had a huge amount of help from many wonderful friends, like, Ollie, who's recording this, did all the text extraction from her typewriter stuff so that I didn't have to retype them, that they extracted into text. Loulou helped me navigate Mixam and the printing of it without smashing my computer, and many other friends who are thanked in the back of there. It was kind of a bit of a team effort. I called in a lot of favors.
Yeah.
And
So this is a great tribute to your nan. Yeah.
thanks. It means a lot, and I think I think it represents us and her well. And she, unfortunately, didn't get to hold the printed copy. It came 3 days after she died. I rushed it through in every way I could.
Yeah.
But I did get to show her. I showed her the PDF
it takes
copy,
so long to
the
print.
cover. 2
weeks, I think.
The printing was like 2 weeks, and
Yeah.
I contacted them and I paid them extra, but still it's like 1.5 weeks. And But I showed her the printed copy and I read her at least half of the book. Though with some of it, she was at various stages of responsiveness. Some of it was a couple of days before and she couldn't really speak anymore. But I knew she was listening because she made a noise at the end of each poem. And there's something really like profound and precious about an experience with a relative who is leaving you, who cannot communicate their needs, who you're caring for really intensively. She still somehow was breaking through all those palliative care, end of life drugs and all the running out of energy and everything. Like, and definitely was there listening because she wasn't making noises in the middle of the poems. She's making noises at the end of each poem. Like, and
So you read her the collection?
I read her half of it. I didn't want to wear her out. I read her best bits from all the way through and then I read her half of it. It was a really busy week and it was hard to fit things in. But also you're like aware that this person's lying there and probably wants a rest and doesn't want you to read them a whole book.
Do you mind if I read one of her poems now?
Yeah.
Because I read one today on the train, actually, and brought a tear to the eye.
Yeah,
That was the
go
first
for
time I just
it.
read it.
Which one?
It's not the
Was,
collection. The
It's close to where you've marked.
I can tell you the page.
It's the one just after, I think.
That one. The coffee table.
Oh, yeah.
I had a friend with a very nice coffee table. She got angry with her son, making dreadful marks on it, playing noughts and crosses without anything to rest on. He died soon after, and she never polishes it now. She likes the marks. And it's just like hit me on the train today, coming up here.
Yeah.
And because it was like so out of the blue, you know?
She is the master of the sudden punchy ending.
Yeah.
Like, it's one of the things I realised putting this together is a lot of her poems pack this sudden punch and you're just like, whoof, wow. And she was, as a person, a very gentle person. And, you know, when you're a writer, I think sometimes the only ways you can get out some of the big stuff like anger or kind of punchy stuff when you're quite a gentle person, or like quite acerbic humour, maybe quite dark humour, is it comes out on the page. And the version of her in her poems is a little more daring and outspoken than, not that she wasn't daring or
So she
knew
was
to
different.
speak her
She
mind.
was different to you then.
She she didn't have my drive for self-promotion. But like, this is one of the virtues of writing for yourself for most of your life as a poet, not doing what we're all doing, which is like publishing and promoting and performing. Is she was writing for herself.
Yeah.
So I think the version of her in her poems is actually like a really personal, intimate, you know, daring kind of part of her.
Yeah.
Which is very precious to have,
Do you
and
know
I'm
what
very
it-
privileged to share with people.
Do you know what it meant for her to have her only publication be done by her grandchild?
I think at the stage we were doing it, I would have loved to check it with her more, but she just didn't have the energy. Like, there were many of her poems didn't have titles, and at first I got her to give them titles, and then she just didn't have the energy for it, and I'd give them titles. But I didn't have to do that for too many of them. But we got to that stage. And I said, look, Nan, do you want to read the manuscript? Because, like, here it is. And she's like, I trust you. Like, go for it. Because there was so much going on. When you're dealing with so much in your body, like, you can't deal with so much of the external world. But I think we were very close. And there was a great deal of trust between us. She was one of my most avid readers and loved my poetry. And has read some poems you wouldn't normally send to your nan because she was very technically capable and she was on social media. So knows more about my sex life than most nans. Because
Was
of
that the
my
one about the
poetry.
domination?
Sorry?
There's one in the collection, right, about
Yeah.
domination.
Yeah, absolutely. And like it's so I think she knows what kind of poet I am and the kind of stuff I put out there. And one of the things I would say to her was like, you know, by contrast, Nan, you're going to look very literary and proper. You know, like, so like, it's not going to be, if you think yours are embarrassing, mine are much more embarrassing. But I was, I would have in some ways liked to work on it with her more, but I think it was just something that she wasn't able to do. But what I did, I worked on it with her in mind and with as much communication with her as I could, and reading it to her afterwards, and never got anything but good feelings. And one of the wonderful things about doing it, while she didn't get to hold the physical copy, one of the main reasons I did it, and in such a rush as I did it, was problem with being a secretive poet, and I say this to any secretive poets listening as well, is your only audience is your own self-critic. And I have voice memos from her from like a month or two before her death saying, oh, my poems are rubbish. Don't bother with them. They're rubbish. And like...
Yeah, sometimes having the exterior opinion helps you think better of your own poetry, actually.
Yeah, no, we're so harsh on our own stuff. And especially if you're someone who... She was tremendously modest. Like, I used to joke, like, chronically modest. And one of the things I wanted to give her in doing this process was to be proud of her work. And I sent the draft of the manuscript to lots of people I know, lots of poets. And the people who got back to me, Loulou, you did, and Kofi Achina, who I love and adore, who's wonderful. We had on
the show as well.
Yeah, and he might be doing some of the readings with me in London, might read Nan's poems, hopefully, in London. And Becca Audra Smith, you guys got back to me with these beautiful reviews, and I sent them to her, and yours was the first one I sent to her, Loulou, and it brought her to tears. She was so like, she'd never heard anyone other than me, who she thinks has to say it because I'm her grandchild. She'd never heard such validation for her work. And so in the final like week, 2 weeks of her life, she was saying things like, well, I'm quite good at kind of writing little vignettes. I'm kind of, this I'm all right at, and that I'm all right. And like that, it is never too late. You're 79, you're really ill, it's your final weeks. It is never too late from a lifetime of saying it's rubbish to like being proud of her work. I was so pleased. And beyond that, for me now, the collection is really about sharing pieces of her with the world, because she was the best person I knew. She's one of the best people I'm ever going to know. She's irreplaceable. And like, I got so much of her. I was so very, very lucky. And I just want to be able to like share that a little.
Will you be performing her poetry live? Or are you saying Kofi or friends of yours will be?
I've already done one reading where it was just me at the Feminist Bookshop for FemFest, and that was lovely and precious. And for me, it's actually lovely to read out her poetry. And it's surprising how much it feels like reading out my poetry. Like, I've done other cover versions before, and it doesn't feel like this. There is very internal joining threads between my nan and I and the way we write. And also I just don't feel like entirely like I'm performing somebody else's work. It's a strange thing, maybe having worked with it so closely, but also we were just very similar people in many ways. So I've done that, but also we're going to do some shows, some reading circles and some shows with various poets who were involved in the making of the book in some ways. Reading my nan's poetry, because I think there's something beautiful about having the two voices and it really being a conversation on the stage.
Yeah.
And that's also quite unusual. You know, we've been to a lot of poetry nights. Usually it's one person on the mic, and I love collaboration. I want to work with people, and I want to try and get, every time we do it, I'm going to try and get the poets to bring some of their own poems as well and broaden out the conversation. I'm really excited about that. I'm kind of getting it together and getting it sorted slowly. I've been dealing with grief and funerals and things. And if anybody wants us to come do that show, you know, do get in touch with me at Reanna Valentine on most social media. Do find me and I will come and drag one of my friends with me, or find a friend in that town.
So the collection's called Fragmented Light. It's called Fragmented Light. And so the poem Fragmented Light in there, that's by you?
Nope, that's my nan's. That's in typewriter. Sorry, that's the only thing I did. I decided not to put our names all the way through because I wanted it to be a flowing conversation. So anything in typewriter font is my nan's. So
Should we read it?
Yeah.
Hers is the title poem, always comes first. And it was written about a breakup, this. And I realised after she died just how much it speaks to grief. Like, this is a poem I found tremendously helpful in the last few weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you could you perform it for us? Or
Yeah, I can read it, absolutely. As long as you don't mind possible crying, it's all good.
Fragmented light. Fragmented light touches more points, broken from its source. It spreads to more contacts, so your affection removed from reality lights life diversely. Refracted light shines on. We are no longer close, separated, yet the long, steady beam of love, deflected at the point of separation, splits, prismatic, less defined but more radiant, retrieved beyond the separation. Love in new colors warms my mind. Thoughts and actions thus affected, from our past to my future, crosses over your untouching hand.
Rods and cones. Don't think I have many photos of us, though I can see you so clearly. The rods that marked your silhouette up and died. Constant shadow, you were once so bright. To me, it bleached them out, leached the rhodopsin from my retinas, so I can always see your absence. But the cones, the colours, are on the comeback.
It's a bit surreal to me because this poem, I heard it so many times from editing the documentary.
Yeah,
I heard it
of
at least 60 times.
Oh wow, I'm so sorry.
And there was a point where it was just with me, like when I was making food and stuff, like just I had the voice.
I think
editing is like that, so
but I think seeing it in the context with your nan's,
it has a different meaning. Putting it together, it's really interesting.
It's you know the light, the images of light and the metaphors with human relationships. I think these go really well together. And it gives. And I mean, I've heard your Rods and Cones poem before as well, but it really does add a new perspective to it. And
this is one of those pairs where I'm of the strong opinion that my nan's is by far the better poem. However, it was a pair that jumped out to me because I was like, it was just a really natural pairing. You're like, okay, so we've got a breakup, we've got loss, we've got a bunch of metaphors about light and the eye. Like it was, and it was kind of weird. We've both written these in parallel, 40 years apart, and they're so freaking similar.
It's so interesting because usually in a poet's work, like some words come back, in different circumstances. Like there's like color that would show up in different poems, and these they show up in two different poets. Instead it's like a conversation.
That was one of the wonderful things about doing this project, and I kind of knew would happen because when I proposed the project to my nan, I was like, we have all this commonality. It's kind of weird across our poetry how much it's similar when we hadn't seen each other's poetry when we were writing it. But then when I came to do it as a process, just how easily the pairs fell together, and then how easy it was to arrange the pairs into a flowing conversation that forms the whole book was a surprise even to me. Yeah,
is there, this might be a bit of a strange question, but is there a narrative then that forms in your mind, or a very loose one? I know at the start there's a lot of poems about water.
Yeah.
Right? And when I started reading this collection, I was like, oh, there's a lot of sea poems here.
Well, that's my review actually.
Yeah, no, your review's beautiful. It's so poetic.
Yeah, shall I read
your
it?
review?
So
Yeah.
It makes sense with previous as well. A meditation on escaping a marriage, on escaping womanhood, on being guided through life by the sea and the forest. Salty water might not be pleasant in tea, but it makes for a place to swim.
You wrote that?
Yeah.
Dude! Oh my god! Like when you sent it, I showed it to a couple of people. I showed it to Jamie who edited it. I showed it to Ollie and me. It made me cry, and we were like, "Whoa, that's what Loulou killed this review!"
I didn't see that. That was great.
For me, having somebody else like knit together the way my nan and I write, so poetically and in such a oneness. Like, it was a really beautiful moment. I really appreciated it. But yeah, that Rods and Cones is written about the breakup that I went to see her about, that made her show me all her poetry.
Oh, wow.
And most of her poetry about longing
much,
was written about a single breakup as well.
So much history in all of these poems, you know.
Yeah.
It's like when you just read it, there's no way we can understand all of that's what is going through.
This brings me to mind of one of your poems, actually.
Oh, okay.
It's called...
Yeah, it makes me want to do more reviews. You know, we wanted to do more reviews anyway as part of Poetry to Your Ears.
Oh,
but
we should
to
probably
think of the impact that reviews can have. I didn't think it.
Yeah, no, it's a
touching
beautiful
to me,
thing. You did a great thing. What did I put on the back of yours? The direct poetics of hairy asses.
Yeah,
I enjoyed writing that. It's really fun to write. It's nice to respond. It's like poetry can be quite solitary, and like reviewing each other's stuff and promoting it is one way to collaborate. But I would like to explore more collaborative work, because I think you get so much more when you're bouncing off each other's ideas, words, history, all of it, you know. Such different approaches.
Heya! I hope you're enjoying listening to this episode. This episode is sponsored by Write Bloody UK. They're an independent publisher that publishes bloody beautiful poetry books. You get 10% off all books on their website, writebloodyuk.co.uk, with the code Poetry to Your Ears. That's 10% off with the code Poetry to Your Ears on the website, writebloodyuk.co.uk. Hope you enjoy it.
We just want to take a moment to talk to you about Fawn Press. Poetry to Your Ears is a podcast sponsored by Fawn Press, an indie press that publishes poetry that takes you by the hand and leads you into the woods. You can get 10% off all books on their website, www.fawnpress.co.uk, with the code Poetry10, as small letters, Poetry 10. You will find the code and the link in the description below.
Yes, I'm going to read Carolyn's poems, and Reanna's going to read their own poems, which always look at each other in the poetry book.
I found it.
Oh, you found it.
Yeah.
Cool.
So you were saying about the poems and I'll read the poem. It's called Spirits.
Oh, yes.
That's
Actually, hang on. We're going to read that
That's
later.
part of the pair. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the pairs we're going to read.
So if I point out just the bit that I was thinking of was the part where you say, the poems are their own spirits. They belong to themselves. They are their own things that exist in the world. We were having a conversation about this as well, when that poets see the world in a different way, and people who write poetry see the world in a different way. That there's poems everywhere. You know, that the stories in our life are poems, whether you write them or not, whether you put them down on the page or not.
Yeah, you were saying that about that poet in Birmingham, Zafar Kunyo. I'm sorry if I didn't say it right, but basically he saw his dad, who died in a photography exhibition in Birmingham. About
by chance in a shop.
Yeah, just by chance. It was about recent immigrants, like one of the first immigrants in Birmingham, and there was his dad there, and someone asked him, "Are you going to write a poem about that?" And he said, "I think that's already a poem." Yeah. So it's an interesting thought about what is a poem? Is it the form of writing, or is it just life? You know,
there's an interesting like frustration as well for a poet. I think at the point where I'm at, where I'm quite prolific and I write about most things, and I write mostly about my life. Like and I write most days in good periods. In bad periods, not most days, but most days and most of the time. By good periods, I mean good writing periods, often the ones where I'm writing every day or when I'm miserable. But anyway, is like, am I mining my life too much? Am I narrating my own life too much? Should this thing be sacrosanct and not be made into a poem? And then it's this like thing of actually, I should only be writing a poem about it if that poem is in itself kind of sacrosanct. Is it is good enough and not good like good writing, but like with the intention of exploring something with heart and holding it, like not just trying to get a good poem out of it. Like,
yeah, I have that as well. Like I feel like I'm a better poet when I'm suffering, but as a person I don't want to suffer most of my life.
yep.
But does that make me a better poet? And it's the tortured artist kind of debate.
Yeah.
And I think you can be happy in your life and do good artwork.
But I think Rihanna's saying something different.
Oh, is it something else?
It's
that
really fascinating.
I agree. Like a lot of my bad periods are the times when I write. Like I'm the same. Like it's almost a silver lining for me now. Is like I might be really depressed, but I am writing a lot. It's like it's nicer to be happy and out in the sun. But like if I'm having a bad period, I'm often quite productive, and it can be frustrating. But also for me, I suppose it's like I guess there's silver linings in both situations. But
you seem to be saying that you feel the sense that it's almost like you don't want to exploit something for the sake of making, I don't know, a showpiece, or when maybe that's that you feel like it's inauthentic, or you feel like you're trying to push the emotions too much, like you dramatize something that is very real and very important to you. And I just find it fascinating hearing you talk about the process, because I don't have that process. And it sounds like you only feel like poems are justified when they are truly authentic sentiments or emotions.
I think definitely authenticity and communicating an emotion with truth is a lot of great importance to me, and a lot of what my work is about. Because I'm not, the world's biggest master of metaphor or delicate, beautiful writing. Like a lot of it is about trying to get the thing out like the thing really is. But I think certainly there comes a tipping point where you've been a poet for a while and you're like, am I just like, you question yourself and you question the process and what you're doing and how it behaves in your life. And I'm going to misquote Sean Bonney. There's a wonderful Sean Bonney book where it's like typewritten poems that are ripped up and laid over each other. And there's a line in it that really spoke to me. I can't remember the exact line. It's something like the stars keep talking to me, or the stars won't leave me alone. That gave me that feeling of like how I sometimes feel like my mind is constantly generating poetry and everything is like generating poetry in my mind. And sometimes I do kind of wish I could just switch it the fuck off. like just like live my life and not narrate it. I think, a lot of poets are kind of overthinkers, maybe. I certainly am. And it's that kind of trying to find that balance between writing about your life and living your life,
Yeah, it's a big philosophy thing about reflection. It's got a proper term, like having a reflective life or leading an active life.
Like, am I being present if I'm generating poetry in my head?
And
Probably not.
If you're reflective, then maybe you're not living in the moment as much. But if you're not reflecting, then you just don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, there's that tensions between being present and like producing something, or being present and like and planning and making things you want to happen happen.
I think for poets, like Plato can be a big philosophical reference, because he's a big proponent of the philosopher having reflecting throughout your life. And he in his thesis he says like a good leader cannot be younger than 50 because he hasn't reflected on his life, previously. And I think a lot of poetry is very, very self-aware, to a fault maybe, but
Yeah, no.
So I think you can find great comfort in that philosophical like.
I tried to ban myself from using the word I in January instead of doing like Veganuary or Dry January. I was like, maybe I can spend the whole of January writing poetry without the word I in it. I lasted 6 days. And I was so frustrated with myself. I think you get to the point almost after a little while of being right where you're a bit sick of yourself. Like
That's great.
You're a bit like, oh, for fuck's sake. I've said to my like poetry group who I see every couple of weeks, like I'm really like would like to escape myself sometimes and write about something else. But even when we're doing translation poems, it ends up being about my recent grief or something.
Yeah, but it can be a different I as well. It doesn't have to be you. It can be a different version of you. It can be someone else through the voice of I.
This is one of the things that made me write
that.
Spirits, actually, was I'd written a couple of poems that were in different characters, and it's like, this poem isn't me. It isn't a piece of me, just it's also its own little momentum, its own little kind of dancing thing. It's like, you know, it's through the filter of like an imagined person or a celebrity or a particularly dark aspect of my consciousness or whatever. Like, it's not just a part of me.
Yeah, your whole being.
Yeah, absolutely.
Shall we read the
let's hear
spell?
it.
Yeah.
Let's hear them.
Which ones are we reading?
Your sins will find you out.
Yes.
And spirits. Your sins will find you out. Once, as a child, extraordinarily cross, I wrote all the swear words I knew on a scrap of paper and sent it up the chimney. Exercised, relieved, I consigned it to smoke. Dramatic, I thought, and satisfying. Next day, after school, I found the paper, propped up centrally on the mantelpiece, under the mirror. My parents, homing always with uncanny accuracy upon my sins, had found me out. Had they spiraled up to the smoke by the chimney to await its emergence? Or had the wind itself laid it reprovingly and righteously at their feet as they came up the path? I threw it away very quickly, thus without doubt, proving my guilt.
I love that poem. Like, it's so my nan. Like, it's so her personality. It just makes me really happy. Like, it's just so silly. Like, it's like, yeah, no. She would never say all those swear words out loud, but it's just like her to have once written them down and then been completely found out. And I asked her, and apparently her and her parents never spoke about this. It really did all happen in silence, with the paper going on the mantelpiece and then her throwing it away, and nobody ever spoke about it, which is just hilarious. But yeah, this is one of the more esoteric pairs, I guess, in some ways, because the reason it's paired with my poem Spirits is because that one really does feel like a piece of my nan that I get to keep. So yeah, it's paired with this, which is a relatively recent poem, which I wrote when I was thinking about losing my nan and thinking about going through her work as well. Spirits. Long have I thought poems are little pieces of the poet's spirit. It brought me comfort that I might keep shimmers of people I was yet to lose. Partly true, but this little ditty insistently wants to correct me. Poems are their own spirits, gracious enough to cavort with us.
I like cavort.
It took me a few days to come up with that word.
Really?
Yeah, it was like dance and it was something else, and it was one of those where I actually did go back to it and change it until it felt right, which I usually don't have the patience
Totally
to do.
nailed it.
Thank you.
Perfect. The perfect way.
Like the occasions I've actually, properly thought about a poem and not just moved on to the next one.
It just really does, but it perfectly summarizes the relationship that a poem and a person has. It's
Yeah, even, other people's poems can stay in your mind and just kind of repeat themselves and kind of travel with you in your daily life.
Yeah, it definitely feels like to me those particular poems that I read, particularly Mary Oliver poems, my nan's poems, other people's poems, the way you feel like you're calling a bit of their spirit into the room. And I very much feel that with performing this book. But then it's also like the poem is its own little thing, its own little fairy, its own little, you don't want to be a narcissistic parent to all your poems and be like, you're just a part of me. There's a kind of a magic, an incantation, a strange aliveness to poetry. I think poems have got like an immortal little life. And that's one of the things I most love about them. Like, you can read Rumi and it will still feel entirely present, like a real person whispering in your ear from hundreds and hundreds of years ago.
Well, especially page poetry, because you read it in your own voice, whereas spoken word is kind of carried by the poet, carried by the person, and you get your own reading of it, your own interpretation. Yeah.
So when is this coming out then?
So the
Fragmented
book
Light.
was officially published, I guess, on the 8th of March when it got delivered to my house, and is now available to buy at the Queering, which is a queer collective bookshop. It's at the Feminist Bookshop
in Brighton,
which is also, they're selling it online. So if you want to buy it online, you can order it from them. Links to that are in my bio at Reanna Valentine on Instagram, or it's a link tree, so you can just put in linktree/Reanna Valentine. And I'm going to be touring the book. There are book launches in Brighton at the Query on the 18th and 22nd of April. But hopefully there will also be shows at least in London and in Bristol. And then I've possibly got my eyes on Glasgow, Sheffield, Manchester. There's little things I'm working on it.
Yeah.
I'm working on it. Like, we'll see what comes off and what doesn't.
That's great. And you're bringing Kofi along?
Yeah, so Kofi's
really?
Kofi's London.
Okay.
Jamie Smith is doing the readings in Brighton. My wonderful friend Charlie, who I ran Poetry Meet Cute for a long time with, is going to do the reading in Bristol if we get that sorted. So it's kind of like different people are getting to voice the poems. But actually, Loulou will have been the first person to perform the Mother Than Me today. So, which is nice.
Is that the first book launch then for the podcast?
Right.
Great. So check Reanna out online and check out the book.
Fragmented Light.
Yeah. And it was
a pleasure
great.
to have you
great talking.
again.
Yeah, it's been so lovely. I really appreciate getting to talk about this project. It's very close to my heart. So thank you for having me.
And thank you for tuning in, and see you next time.
Restent deux femmes et un parapluie au coin de la rue, papotage féminin de bord. La brume rit, secoue ses cheveux. De l'autre côté de la rue, l'homme les observe, de loin, de dos.
Thank you for listening to Poetry to Your Ears.
Son sac à dos pour les imprimer.
This podcast is published as a newsletter on Substack. All of our content is published for free, but if you would like to support our work, you can become a paid subscriber. This will help us support transcripts for the deaf and hard of hearing community, and anyone who would benefit from reading the podcast alongside hearing it. You can also support us for free by rating the show on Spotify and Apple Podcast, or writing a review on Apple Podcast. Share the show with your friends, fellow poets, and poetry lovers. If you want to interact with us, you can follow us on @poetry2yourears on Instagram and @poetry2 on Twitter, or you can also write a comment on Substack. If you're American and you're listening to us, send us a message. Half of our listeners are American. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time.